And welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you by Projections, an IRI company. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit Projections online at projectionsinc.com. I'm Jennifer Oraqua, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. Now, too often, human resources has been painted as a passive profession, a team that only comes into play when something goes wrong, reactive rather than proactive. HR is too often seen as the compliance police, mired in red tape. But this narrow view of human resources and the role we play in successful organizations is changing, in part thanks to the crises of 2020, which showcased exactly what HR can achieve when given the space to do so. So joining me today is Steve Browne, the Chief People Officer for LaRosa's and author of HR Rising, From Ownership to Leadership. It's a forward-thinking book praising the powerful global force that really is human resources. Steve, thank you so much for joining me today on Project HR. I've been looking forward to this.
Me too, Jennifer. I'm very excited. This is very cool.
So Steve, HR Rising isn't the first human resources book you've authored. Can you tell us about the book that came first?
The first book was HR on Purpose, and I wrote it back in 2017.
And what was HR on Purpose about?
It was more about owning what we do instead of apologizing for who we are. Too often, HR people are sorry for being in the profession instead of owning what they do. Mm-hmm. And it kills us. It hurts our credibility. It hurts our position within companies. Mm. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be very proud and passionate about what we do.
For sure. So looking back, would you consider HR on Purpose to be kind of a prequel to the new book, HR Rising?
A little bit, but not really completely. The second book was more on leadership, how to lead from where you are. Again, not a new concept at all, but HR people tend to lead if they're given a title. Mm. Now, it doesn't mean that if you have a title, you lead. It's kind of an old myth. Mm. But my thing is HR people can and should lead from where they are within the organization because you're with people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what inspired you to write HR Rising?
After the success of the first book, which kind of really took me by surprise,
Yep.
I just felt I had it in me. And I was talking to my publisher and he says, "Do you think you have another one?" Huh? And I said, yes. And what was interesting, Jennifer, is the first book took 1.5 years to write. Mm-hmm. The second one took 1.5 months.
Oh, wow. So what changed between the two? What, like in your life, in your perspective, how did that happen?
Things at work, experiences, stories I'd heard from other people, and just a way to move that forward and get another encouraging message out there. It ironically released during the pandemic. And this was before HR was seen in a leadership capacity. It was interesting in 2008, finance people were seen as leaders because they helped us through the financial side of things. Mm-hmm. And now companies have finally realized that every issue is a people issue, not the pandemic, but every issue. Mm-hmm. So if that's true, then we should lead all the time, not just during a crisis.
Makes perfect sense. So in both books, you shared real stories from your life to illustrate your messages. Why that approach? Why do you think that's been so successful?
People like stories, and people remember stories far more than they do lofty examples or heavy data. There's times and places for those things, but if you were sitting on a porch or in a pub or at a coffee shop and you just shared what's going on, people will take that to heart. We're experiential people. Mm-hmm. Everybody is. Mm-hmm. So you learn far more from stories. And it's funny, I've taught my book, which sounds weird, the first one, several times to college classes. And the students who are just going into the profession go, "Are these stories real?" Come on.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, what makes you think they're not? And so they shared it and they're like, "Well, you seem to be positive. You're positive all the time. Is that really true?" Yes. And it just tells you how far down the wrong path we've gone as a profession, or we've gone as a descriptive narrative for HR, that people don't see us in a positive light when they could.
Mm-hmm. So if you come across someone, like the students where they're like, "Come on, at these real stories," what's your favorite story to tell?
My favorite story, well, one from each book The one in HR on Purpose was the shipping supervisor who greeted me every morning by saying "F you"
Mhm.
out loud, and
Mhm.
and how to contrast that no one ever talked to Don,
Mhm.
and until someone talked to him, they didn't realize how he was a wonderful person who just happened to swear.
All right, that's
And
a good
and
one.
I think it's interesting, we get a little pretentious when it comes to HR instead of
Mhm.
saying, meeting people where they are. And in the HR Rising, I'd have to say it was the story I opened the book
Mm.
with my dad,
Mhm.
not giving me the sledgehammer to knock down the plaster,
Mhm.
and not equipping me to do what I needed to do. The real reason it means so much is I got to read it to him because he had gone blind with
Mm.
his diabetes.
Mhm.
And so to share the story with him in person was timeless.
Yeah, that's powerful. So, who do you see as the audience for your books? At what like when you're writing, who are you thinking of in reading this?
I think it's anybody who works with people.
Mhm.
I think we have a misconception that HR resides in a department, and HR, in my opinion, resides wherever there are people. So if you're a one who leads people, or you manage others, or you're in a supervisor
Mhm.
capacity, you're doing HR. You may not
Mm.
know it, but
Mhm.
the employee relations side, the relationship side, the caring, the empathy, the shepherding,
Mhm.
that happens everywhere in an organization. So I've had people read this. In fact, one of the groups I've talked to on a regular basis is a group of superintendents in training in
Mhm.
Texas.
Mhm.
And they read this book because they're in the people business in schools.
Hmm.
So they're learning how to have a much more forward thinking, positive, constructive way to look at people, even though their title isn't directly HR.
Right, right. That makes sense. So tell me a little bit about your work experience. Obviously, you tap into your experiences to tell these stories, to bring people around to your way of approaching this. Tell us a little bit more about you and how you've come to where you are at this point.
I've run the gamut of HR. I worked in a large corporation where it was soulless, in my opinion. It's a great company,
Mm,
phenomenal company. I just didn't fit.
mm,
And back when I started, we didn't talk about culture. We didn't talk
mm,
about even human resources. It was just now a term. It was personnel or industrial relations or labor relations. And it was very much an us versus them, compliance driven
oh wow, yeah.
approach to
Mm-hmm.
HR, even in a large organization. And I was limited as to what I could do. So I said, something's not right. So I switched when I probably shouldn't have,
Mm,
and said, I'll make it. And
hmm,
I landed in an entrepreneurial company
mm-hmm.
where I was allowed to be creative and make it up. They
Mm,
had never had HR.
mm-hmm.
So it was much more learning on by a hands-on method.
Mm-hmm.
And not to share my age, but this was before computers, not even the internet. It was before computers.
Uh-huh.
So, a lot of it was paper and travel and conversations. And over time, I came to realize that people want to do good work,
Mm-hmm.
people want to succeed, but even more so, people want to be valued for who they are and what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And HR has missed that message for decades.
Yeah, for
We
sure.
talk we talk around it, we call it
Mm-hmm.
different things, but when you start having those real world stories with people,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes more tangible for them and for the company.
Yeah.
And since then, I only work for places that allowed me to do that. And if they didn't do it to the extent that I felt comfortable, I changed
Mm-hmm.
until I landed here.
Mm-hmm.
And the big change here, when I interviewed with my boss 15 years ago this year, which is
Mm-hmm.
crazy, uh, I said, I need two things. One, I need to stay connected externally because I've worked so hard to build up a network across the globe.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, I want to be integrated throughout the company.
Mm.
And I don't want HR to be a silo. And if that's how you want to see HR, you don't need me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, we want integration. So it's
Nice.
been great.
So, on that same note, do you see HR Rising as a vehicle to inspire HR professionals personally, like to think bigger, or is it more to challenge organizations to rethink their view of human resources?
I think both. And this is why. My company that I'm working at has been around for 67 years, and they're so cool. They did a book party for me on the first book. And the
Nice.
second one, they made a giant poster and everybody signed it.
Uh-huh.
But then they read the book.
Mm.
So it's different than just saying, way to go, way to be
Mhm.
an author.
Sure. Yeah.
And when they read it, and in the second book, there are stories that they know are LaRosa's stories, but it doesn't say that directly.
Sure.
And they came back and go, wow, this is who we are. I said,
Mm.
it is.
Mhm.
In fact, I'll give you the real tipping point. My boss, who I mentioned earlier, unfortunately passed away 3 days before Christmas in 2020. He had a heart
Mm.
attack. The CEO, Michael LaRosa, said, hey, now that we have this opportunity, we're going to reset and we are going to intentionally have a people first lens from all we do in every aspect going forward.
Mm.
And that's from reading the book.
Mhm.
So I think this can be used to influence leaders outside of HR, and it should equip HR professionals to truly lead.
Yeah, I love that. All right, Steve, I need to take a quick sponsorship break right now, but after that, I want to talk about how human resources can rise up to bring about meaningful change in the workplace.
Companies today often spend a lot of time and money on employee engagement, but they don't always get the results that they want. At IRI Consultants, we help companies create an engaging culture where employees feel valued and appreciated. We combine our expertise in human resources with cutting-edge technology to deliver proven solutions for improving your workplace morale, productivity, and profitability. The IRI team is made up of experienced management consultants who, since 1979, have helped thousands of companies navigate workplace challenges. We'll help you achieve your goals by combining research-based best practices with real-life experience and practical insights to develop customized solutions based on your company's unique needs and challenges. At IRI, we focus on providing the right solution at the right price point to help you improve performance through better employee engagement strategies. Learn more today at iriconsultants.com.
I'm back with Steve Browne, the Chief People Officer for LaRosa's and author of HR Rising: From Ownership to Leadership. Now, Steve, in your book's write-up, you talk about the global power of HR and how it's a force that can bring about change. Can you share a little bit more about your thoughts on that aspect of human resources?
It's interesting that we talk about companies being global, but we don't talk about our profession being global.
Hmm.
It stuns me. We talk about the commodity side of globalization or the integration of revenue across streams everywhere around the world. But what's missing is the component of people. I know that the labor issues in China are different than India and different than Africa and the UK,
Mm.
but people aren't different to the extent of, I know you have to follow the systems that are around you,
Mm.
but HR can come together as a community and say, how can we be a better resource for each other? How can we learn from each other? How can we take components from what you're doing well and help me do well in my
Hmm.
company? So I think it's more, how do we become global as an HR community than it is globalization.
Interesting. So, in a perfect world, how do you see HR's role expanding in that way?
It's time for HR people to be intentional.
Mm.
And I find it very disheartening still that HR is passive. And I don't mean being a bully or running through the organization, crazy and causing chaos. But every day I talk to the CEO and
Hmm.
I encourage him and I also correct him and he
Hmm.
corrects me. I talk to the president and I encourage him and I correct him. I talk to the receptionist and I encourage her and correct her. Our role as HR leaders is to move the company forward through connecting the company together.
Hmm.
So, quick example, one of the things we did in our reset was we put that one of our core beliefs is building relationships. You go, oh, that sounds wonderful. But
Hmm.
here's what happens: if you build relationships, you eliminate silos.
Hmm.
So, why wouldn't I be the person who connects people to build relationships across the organization?
Hmm.
And instead of saying we're all disjointed and we don't communicate, use HR to pull it together to make it happen.
Hmm.
And in the end, over time, that'll make the company even more successful.
So, as HR professionals, how do we begin that expansion? Like, where can we start?
Wow. I think you have to look and see what is right in front of you. It's funny. We have so many things, Jennifer, in our organizations that are just senseless.
Mm. True.
uh, uh, Things that are, when you look at what are obstacles that are in the way of doing good work.
Mm.
And I'll give you a quick example. I'm really working on the concept of performance versus visibility.
Hmm.
Performance is, I expect you to do well.
Mm-hmm.
How can I equip you to do well? And I quit measuring what you're not doing well. Most companies still, even with remote working or people returning to work, it's visibility. And we're like, oh, if I see Jennifer, she's working. Well, that's
Mm.
what? It's silly.
Mm.
And we still have long held, hard, old myths. If I have FaceTime, I have value. If I'm the most vocal, I have value.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm this gender, that gender, this position, this level, it's a mess.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you say, as an HR professional, how can I take the strengths that people have,
Mm-hmm.
expect them to perform, and listen to their expectations as well, and then move the company forward incrementally over time?
So, how do we change sort of the hearts and minds about our roles with senior leadership?
It's really interesting when you say that everything's not a people issue. It's a work issue. It's a supply chain issue. It's a sales issue. It's a revenue issue.
Mm-hmm.
Do this. In a conversation, listen to the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth word, and you will hear someone's name.
Hmm.
So they'll say, we're not having enough cheese for our pizza. And Bo,
Yep.
you go, no, wait a minute. Is it a cheese issue? Or is it the person who's responsible somehow isn't as connected as they should be, et cetera,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, et cetera? So
Mm-hmm.
since it's a people issue, what are we doing to help that person do better instead of focusing on what they're not doing? And you really have to talk to senior leaders, because what's funny is 90% of their time, and I don't have that statistically, it's just more observationally, we talk about people all day.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, most of it is not constructive. So to turn that around, you have to start having behaviors that you agree to that lift people up and move people forward,
Mm-hmm.
and correct them and coach them if they need it.
So, are there things that we can do on our own, like, outside of winning hearts and minds in the C suite? Are there things we can do on our own to sort of change the way people outside of HR see us?
Yes. I think the first thing is you have to love what you do. Doggone it.
Mm-hmm.
There's,
Yeah.
if the first thing they do when they hear you say, I'm in HR, they go, oh, and and there's a heavy sigh on your end. You're like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I know. It's funny when I go to presentations, I'll say, hi, I'm in HR. And everybody goes, oh, I'm sorry. It sounds like we're it sounds like we're in AA, like some
Right.
support group. You're like,
Right.
oh, you must be in hell every day. And instead of saying, I get to work with, enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
take in the most unique people every day.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny when you think of how we've made a lot of our initiatives more programs and overarching generalizations, instead of saying we're all diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Fact. If someone's not included, how can we include them? That's inclusion. It's reframing how we do things instead of trying to fall into the baskets everybody's trying to decide.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other piece is HR people have to be curious.
Mm.
You can't come in every day and go, oh, this is the way it is, and there's no way we can change this. I've
Right.
changed so much here, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the expectation now is from my chair, change is an expectation that it's going to happen, that
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be brought up, and it's going to be discussed in a safe way. So that's another chance for HR to lead.
Mm-hmm.
Challenge respectfully, but challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that idea, because if we're not looking for change, if we're not curious, then we are stuck in that compliance loop that you described. So I think we've got to look within ourselves in order to get out of that sort of mindset.
Yes.
All right, Steve, you and I need to take some time out for another quick break. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Oraqua, and my guest today is Steve Browne, Chief People Officer for LaRosa's and author of HR Rising: From Ownership to Leadership. And we are back. So, Steve, what role does communication play in all of this? Should companies be sharing good news and good works accomplished by HR more often than they are?
Yes, I think they should. The banner should be held by HR, though. We have a thing here where we celebrate our team members and what they do, small things and big things. So if we
Mm.
hear a success story, we trumpet it out
Mm.
all over the place
Mm-hmm.
to our entire chain, to people that will never meet each other.
Mm.
HR people don't do that. Now, instead of saying, look what HR did, boy, I saved 10% on our health insurance premium. Well,
Right.
way to go. Instead
Yeah.
of instead of saying, I looked at Jennifer's unique situation in her family and I was able to give her the flexibility that she needed and it still allowed her to do her job well.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. We tend to think that it's a collaborative, one size fits all approach.
Mm-hmm.
It's never worked. It
Mm.
can't, because exceptions will happen the moment you announce something. I wrote in my book, and I believe it with my heart, and I practice it every day. If HR is practiced individually, then you'll do great HR. The whole will take care of itself.
Hmm.
Then you can celebrate. Hey,
Mm-hmm.
and what happens is others will celebrate you. I worked with HR and they did this for me and they
Mm.
took things out of my way and
Mm-hmm.
let the others be your communicator, not just be self-promoting.
Yeah. So, how do we do that? How do we have others sort of champion the HR cause in a positive way?
This is going to sound different. I think it's by spending time with people.
Mm.
The majority of my day is conversations with others, the vast
Mm-hmm.
majority of my day. And if people know they're cared for, genuinely cared for, HR has to model what they expect in others. So
Mm-hmm.
you can't say be engaged and you're not engaged.
Mm-hmm.
You can't say I really wish people were more positive and they hear you complaining in the hallway.
Mm-hmm. Right.
now, in order to do that well, having an external network of peers is a great place to go and dump your bucket.
Hmm.
Someplace to share with, go, oh, I'm really struggling with this. Can you help me?
Mm-hmm.
And talk with each other as peers, because internally it will only tear things down.
Right.
So I think it's amazing. I had lunch at our pizzeria today. I am allowed to eat at other places, but I was eating at a pizzeria, and one of our long-term employees, maintenance guy, who I've had a great relationship with us. He's been us 35 years. He's been with us.
Mm-hmm.
And he sits down. He's like, "Oh man, I'm just worn out." Now I could say, "So, what are you doing? And what's on your plate? And what work are you doing? And what work orders have you done?"
Mm.
The process side. I'm like, "Man, why are you tired?"
Right. Yeah.
And he says, "Oh," and he tells me this great story about this amazing work that he's done. And he showed me all the pictures he took of the work he's done. I go, my gosh, Steve, his name is Steve, by the way. I said, you are so talented. We are so lucky to have you. My
Mm-hmm.
gosh, thank
Yeah.
you for this. You want to sit? Can I get you anything? Can we get you a drink? Can
Hmm.
let's just sit here and hang out for a while.
Yeah.
That was not in his day. That was not in my day. He knew he could approach me,
Mm-hmm.
even though I was having lunch and doing work.
Mm-hmm.
My work falls to the back. I think the key to this whole thing, Jennifer, is if HR can't be others focused, you shouldn't be in HR.
Oh, I love that. That's brilliant. So, who do you think is doing this right now? Who are the models we should be looking at for guidance?
It's interesting. I think there are people who are doing good thought leadership and thought content. I don't know how practical it is.
Mm.
Where I tend to look is, quick story, on Twitter, after the first book, someone started a hashtag that said HR Tribe,
Mm.
because it was find your tribe in the first book. And then
Mm-hmm.
someone got upset because of the word tribe.
Mm.
And I went, oh, I'm sorry, that was never the intent. And I said, you know what? What can we do? So I started a hashtag called HR Community.
Mm-hmm.
Now, HR Community is global
Mm.
and huge.
Hmm.
And there are people, practitioners, who are out there who use that hashtag literally every day,
Hmm.
who are doing good work.
Okay.
And you can connect with them and talk to them as peers. They are probably the most visible and engaged group from around the world
Mm-hmm.
that are from all levels, director level,
Mm-hmm.
HR assistant level. We've helped people come into the profession and we've helped people stay in the profession
Mm-hmm.
because it's people that do it well.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to give a certain name because it's hard to give people context as who they are. If I
Mhm.
said it was Jeff Palkowski in Wisconsin, absolutely. John Friend in North Dakota, Aaron Stevens in Indiana. I mean, I could give you lists of names,
Mhm.
incredible people who are doing people first work,
Mhm.
but they're doing it within their organizations.
Mhm. Yeah, which is where it matters. So is
Right.
it safe to assume that we should include LaRosa's on that list? I gotta admit, I'm a little jealous of the whole idea of, like, I went to the pizzeria for lunch. I'm like, "Oh, that sounds wonderful." So can you tell us a little bit about LaRosa's and the department that you lead?
I am blessed, and I mean that. I have three incredible people on my team. Rebecca, Shauna, and Julie, who without I wouldn't be able to be on a podcast. I'll be
Mm.
honest.
Mhm.
They take care of our people genuinely, whether it runs from benefits to recruiting, all of the transactional side of HR, they make it hum.
Mm.
But you wouldn't know it's transactional
Hmm.
because it is so full of care and so full of empathy and
Mhm.
authenticity. Our company is different. I mentioned earlier, this is my 15th year at the
Mhm.
company, and I am still by far one of the least tenured people here.
Wow.
My Julie's been with us 27 years. Shauna's been with us 17 years.
Mhm.
Becca's going on 7, and that's my team.
Mm.
Uh, our corporate office has an environment like I've never found. It's funny when you ask people, "What do you like about LaRosa's?" They say, "I don't like LaRosa's. I love it,"
Right.
and
Well,
you can't buy that.
right, for sure. And I assume that your role there has contributed to that greatly over the years. Where can our listeners go to learn more about you, your passion for the HR profession, your books?
For the books, they can go on Amazon.
Mhm.
They're both there, and that's
Mhm.
the best place to find them. For me, the two places you can find me, I'm very active in both forums, is Twitter,
Mhm.
and I'm at S Brown HR. There's an E on the end of Brown,
Mhm.
and on LinkedIn. The odd thing about LinkedIn, though, I did the creator mode, and so
Mhm.
now you have to hit the more button and then click connect.
Yep.
It's wild,
Yeah,
but
I thought about doing that. I didn't do it because of that. I was afraid. Yep.
uh, but the thing to understand, Jennifer, and this is one of the reasons I'm talking to you is if you're connected to me, it's on.
Mm.
I'm very intentional. I'm not somebody who you need to know me. I would
Mhm.
rather know you
Nice.
and see how what you're doing and learn from you and get you connected to others so that they can get to know you as well. So I don't want people to focus on who I am and what I do. I'd rather get them connected to the profession.
Mhm. Networking, that's what it's all about. All right, I wanna let everybody know that links to Steve's author page on Amazon, as well as links to all the things we've talked about, the HR community, hashtag, all of that will be included in this episode's companion guide. So be sure to unlock that today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Steve, it is time for our lightning round questions. These are questions we ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So, our first question is always a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about your book, HR Rising. So, in your opinion, Steve, which of these traits outlined in your book is more critical to success in human resources? To be collaborative or to be trustworthy?
Trustworthy. And the reason I say that, and the way I framed it in the book, is credible.
Mm.
If I'm credible, you'll trust me. If I lose my credibility, you will not.
Hmm.
So HR has to work on building and maintaining credibility by our behavior.
Great answer. All right. What's the best book you've read recently?
Oh gosh, American Lion. It's the story of Andrew Jackson.
Oh, interesting.
So
All right. So,
something non-HR specific.
yeah, but still leadership, still, still talking about people. So, what's the favorite thing about your work that you do?
This sounds cliche, but it's our people.
Hmm.
They fill my bucket every day. The conversation I had today with Steve about the good work that he's doing,
Hmm.
I can't do that enough.
For sure. So, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Meet people where they are, not where you expect them to be.
That was good advice. All right. Finally, who or what inspires you?
3 things. Music. I have music on constantly. I have a forum where I write a song every week that makes fun of HR.
Oh,
I have music. I mean, every kind of music you can think of. Lava lamps, because they're just cool.
okay.
And I have tons of them sitting on. They're on right now in my office.
Nice.
And this is going to sound very old, but tie-dye. I'm a huge tie-dye person. I have it everywhere. And it's just fun. I'm just kind of a casual guy.
I'm sensing a theme between music and lava lamps and tie-dye.
I would say so.
So I'm going to ask you one more question, because where can we go to find these songs about HR that you say you write?
Oh, I've run a forum for 21 years before the internet called the HR Net, and I'll send it to you separately. Only because one thing I found that's very frustrating, but I understand, is HR people are always looking for resources, but they don't have the time or the focus to go get them.
Mm-hmm.
So I put the resources in your lap.
Nice.
So I send a newsletter out. It gives additional resources like this podcast or books or other things that says, hey, you need to find this. And it puts it, and then you can check it as you choose. And there's also a component to the site that says, here are questions. There's a separate website. It's an old-fashioned internet message board. And people post questions. And it has 12,400 people on it globally.
Wow.
And this week's song, I was writing it right before we came on, is Miss You by the Rolling Stones, because Charlie Watts just passed away. But, in fact, this is terrible. I have a Spotify channel of HRNet songs, and it has 500 plus songs that I've done over the years.
Oh, wow.
Just
that's amazing.
The real songs, not my songs, the real songs.
Right. Very good. All right. We'll definitely have to check that out.
Sure.
All right. Thanks so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR, Steve.
Jennifer, thanks so much for the opportunity.
And thanks to our listeners. Once again, this is your reminder to grab the episode companion for this episode, which you definitely want now because of the music and the tie-dye and the lava lamps, at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you'd like to be on Project HR, or you know someone who would, please feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. And last but certainly not least, to make sure you never miss an episode of Project HR, I hope you'll subscribe to the podcast. Drop me a line, leave us a review, or give us a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's it for me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.